Hello, everybody. Welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around fantasy Premier League. My name's Suj.
And my name is James.
James, it feels, I don't know if you'd agree, it feels one of the noisiest pre-seasons in terms of information and options available and jumping around for a long time.
It's good, this, isn't it?
Yeah. Would you
Rather than
agree? Would
everyone's
you
got
would
the
you
same
say there is
thing.
a lot more discussion around 5.5, 6.5s, 4.5s, defenders, this player's available, this player's available. That like it feels like quite often in the past where there's been one or two options, it feels like there's a lot of split opinion at the moment on who to go for. A lot of information coming out from preseason friendlies, which I feel like hasn't always been the case, and people chopping and changing a lot more than previous years.
Yeah, it's really good. I've said it
Yeah.
several times through Correspondent Week last week that they've really done a great job on the pricing this year. It's probably the first time I've ever felt that. Even little bits like, oh, Watkins is like underpriced. Yeah, but when you factor in Haaland, it makes for a really good discussion point. It's tempted you to try and go against the savings of things like Jota versus Salah. Things I've discussed about the 4.5 million defenders versus kind of every 5.0 goalkeeper, the amount of enabling options. I think that was a massive theme from Correspondent Week. It was like half the correspondents tipped up a 5.5 midfielder within their
Yep.
squad.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
suddenly, loads of really good options. And that means we're going to get split opinions of what people are trying to do. Yeah,
Mm.
good job to them. It's
I've
good.
I've always said you've got two options, right? You either make everybody more expensive, that makes it difficult, or you make everybody cheaper, that makes it more difficult because everybody becomes an option. It's a bit of a middle ground here where your premiums are expensive, and then you've got a real cluster in that middle area of like incredible consistent talent like your Fodens and Sakas and all that, maybe 8 to 9, 10 million, and then a wealth of cheap options that genuinely now and I listen to bits and pieces of other people's content where there's like the fear of missing out on the next Cole Palmer. It's like which is going to be the next 5.5 that's going to break through and be the 8 million asset. And we all want it, right? This is one of those things that can make or break and define your season, is picking that right cheaper asset and not having to then chop and change and find a way to get to them, because inevitably you're always 1 or 2 weeks too late. So hopefully this pod, James, will be a help to people, because we are going to try and simplify it down to which are the best options from each of the 20 teams in the Premier League, going A to Z, taking all of the learnings that we have had from Correspondent Week. If people are not patrons and didn't get to tune into the debrief, which is our weekly kind of a daily show, sorry, I should say, for last week, summarizing 5 at a time. So we'll try and rattle through a bit more of a faster pace, A to W, and see what we've learned from the pre-seasons as well, and that kind of thing.
We've now got all the info, haven't we? Well, I say all the info, transfers and stuff like that. But I mean, in terms of
Yeah, of
pre-season,
course.
we're
But
done,
the
we're
most we could
finished.
possibly have, because if you think players are joining this week, very unlikely that they're going to be starting at the weekend.
Yeah. So we're looking at a combination of essentially who we like, who we're interested in going into game week 1 off the back of the Correspondent Week podcast and new learnings from the weekend. And I think very interestingly, I'm probably even stronger on the bench boost idea than I was before the weekend. So I think it's likely for me. I know won't go down that path. So you and I are on very different strategy paths. I'm looking at people specifically for game week 1. You're looking at a longer term. So between us, we should get
I
quite a nice
am.
balance
I
here.
would. I would say one thing. I did make one change to my draft at the weekend, which was to move Salah to Jota, and that put so much money in the bank that I looked at other players that I would potentially want to improve. And it did get me thinking, it's like the bench players now. Am I thinking like Greaves at Ipswich, I can upgrade because I've got 6.5 million in the bank. Mikalenko, I can upgrade. And it did make me think, well, if I've got that option to have a stronger bench boost makes a lot of logical sense. I think bench boost makes sense if you're not going to go with Haaland and or Salah, and then have spread your money everywhere, which means you've got a strong 15, rather than a strong 11 with 4 on the bench.
Yeah, I'd probably be a bit wary for those who are looking at 2 4.0 defenders and a 4.5 midfielder. I'd be a little bit cautious of that,
As a
particularly
bench
this
boost, you
year.
mean?
As a bench boost, I definitely won't be bench boosting with that. Mate. I might be
Yeah,
bench
you
boosting with
say
like
that.
6.5s on the bench and stuff, mate.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. So yeah, I'm still very far away from being comfortable with my draft, but I think more and more players are becoming of interest, and we'll kind of go through them. Arsenal, my biggest thing with Arsenal is I've gone from to Arsenal a week ago in Saliba and Havertz to no Arsenal, and I am slightly concerned at the lack of Arsenal defensive cover, but I feel like I can get away with ignoring the first few and come back a little bit later. As it stands, I have no Arsenal. In terms of what would be shortlistable, I mean, there's done tons of options, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We think the team they played yesterday is going to be really, really close to the team that obviously plays against Wolves on Saturday. Think from that, debatables would be sort of Martinelli versus Trossard on the left wing. Um, whether Partey or Jesus might get a start, for example. But I think certainly Raya, White, Saliba, Rice, Odegaard, Havertz, Saka would be certainties to start unless something goes wrong during the course of this week. With Havertz, I doubt could obviously be one or two positions, but yesterday he played with Partey in a deeper role. Declan Rice really pushed on, 2 assists from 2 corners scored by Gabriel and Saliba.
Yeah,
Um,
he's not in my draft anymore, and he sat there for so long, and people, I wouldn't say
I
poo-pooed
loved
it,
it.
but it was like
Yesterday
there's
it was
better
like,
options
oh,
out there. Honestly, I think I wish I could have the carners to go back to him.
anyone who was pushing the narrative of Gabriel being more threatening from set pieces, as soon as Saliba scored, was like, yeah, maybe I'd just be safer off going for Saliba. Then Gabriel scored afterwards anyway. So yeah, I think Arsenal's a rare one for a top team, isn't it? With just go with the centre backs, generally speaking. Ben White
Yeah,
could well outperform them, but he's 0.5 more. I think between Saliba, Gabriel, I think guys don't overthink this because by the time I think you really want Arsenal defensive, which is probably people will be looking at game week 6 to 8, particularly as a little bit nervous. By then, Calafiori has probably got himself in the team somewhere, and that's going to impact Gabriel way more than it impacts Saliba. So I think
yeah, agree with that for sure.
don't don't take the chance on that. Just go for Saliba. If you can afford a 0.5 extra for Ben White, I don't mind it. David Raya, I think people will look at quite a bit. He's the most owned goalkeeper. Essentially, he's in a quarter of teams at the moment. It's a 0.5 saving to get into the Arsenal backline. My thought on it longer term is the same as what I'd said previously. And I think I discussed it with Adam last week was that yes, you can make the 0.5 saving, but you want to go there because you want Arsenal, not because you think David Raya at 5.5 is the best goalkeeper choice for you. So then I think you need to weigh up the 4.5s. But I get that people will want to cover that area. So I think Raya, Saliba defensively, Odegaard consistency at 8.5 is fine. We don't need to talk about Saka. I think Havertz is a real consideration at 10 million. Declan Rice isn't completely out the running for me this week, Suj. It's not, although he's on the set piece, he's not a player I'd want, but he is one of the 6.5s with one of the best fixtures this weekend, who I know is going to get me minutes and will probably, we think now, play in a more advanced role. So for me, for the 1 week, I don't think I'll go there, but he's not out the running for me. I think Martinelli Trossard is going to be too much of a gamble for
What's
me.
up?
I'm
Yeah.
obviously not going with anyone that's a gamble. So like I'd seen a few people say, oh, Zinchenko is probably going to start game week 1. And I'm not interested in that. And that's obviously bearing in mind what I've said about Calafiori. I think that's possibly a transfer waiting to happen for people. So I'd avoid that. Jesus obviously didn't start yesterday. And I think that was one after Arteta's comments after they played Bayer Leverkusen last midweek was that all Jesus might start up front. So it feels like the big selection for Arsenal, it might sound like a weird one, is probably Jesus or Partey. And that will obviously
Right.
impact where Havertz and Declan Rice
Havertz played and then
specifically
Declan
play.
Rice play. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I think it will probably be Partey who'll get the nod. Martinelli, Trossard's a toss-up. Zinchenko left back. The rest of the team we could probably pick, I think.
Mm.
So look, with the run of fixtures we've got, obviously well documented, tough away fixtures at Villa, Tottenham, and Man City 2, 4, 5. I completely get why people are going to come back and look at this, particularly if you know you're going to wild card early. You're probably only really concerned about this weekend against Wolves.
Yep, agreed. Cool. Let's talk about Aston Villa. Again, a team that I have no players of in my squad. I did strongly consider Ollie Watkins for a long time. But obviously the move of Solanke to Spurs has jumped his ownership massively, and I think a lot of people will want him. I think that just Solanke first two, and then move him on when your fixtures get a bit tougher to Aston Villa when they go on a great run. Leave the money in the bank is a strategy that a lot of people will be on, and I will have enough money in the bank to be able to do that. I'm going to keep some money in the bank to be able to do that. That's my main Villa interest at the moment. The one that's getting the talk of the town at the moment is Morgan Rogers, isn't it? Because obviously at 5 million, he's at 8.1% of teams. People are talking about him being a possible great enabler. And even if you just start with him and then figure out where you're moving to.
Yeah, Bob for the first two, and then Rogers from Villa's turn of fixtures game week 3.
Yeah,
Once you got a little bit more info, it's really important for Rogers to acknowledge that Jacob Ramsey's fit at the moment. And there's certainly different players that can play in those attacking roles. Obviously, got Philogene Biddance back as well. McGinn might play in the 10 position, particularly with the kind of the difficult or challenging first two that they've got. So you couldn't look at Rodgers, I think, at this moment and say definitive start. And I think that applies to Ramsey. I think that applies to Philogene Biddance, because Bailey will start. I think that's fairly certain. Ollie Watkins is not a definite starter on Saturday. Guys on our Patreon on the Villa channel debating it this morning. There's a little bit of a split. I think most think that he will play. Because obviously he's had no preseason minutes, and you look at someone like Saka's already come back and played twice for Arsenal. Do they throw him straight in? I suspect they probably do, but I would also say it's probably not 90 minutes for Ollie Watkins at the weekend. And I think you factor those things in. There is a case to do what you said when we did the kind of the fixture swings podcast a few weeks ago. So that was the first one we really looked at, was sell Tottenham to Aston Villa in game week 3. And if you start with a Kulusevski or Johnson and a Solanke, and you drop that to Rodgers and then up to Watkins, that's your equivalent of value. It might work for people in game week 3, but I suspect it's probably not ideal to put all your eggs into the basket of thinking, I'm going to roll in 2 and buy 2 Aston Villa players in game week 3, because players will break out in different positions and you'll want to chase the value and stuff. But I can see people setting up that sort of move, even going to Son and then dropping down to anyone and allowing Solanke to Watkins. That's more what I'm thinking. He's been in a position where I can drop a number of players down enough to get me Solanke to Watkins in 3. That's the sort of thing that I would even set up from 2. Might be the sort of thing I'm thinking about. Admittedly, it would probably take a -4. And I know I would be of the opinion of not taking hits this season because of the additional transfers. But I think early in the season, if you need to do it and the value is going to be a difference maker to do it, probably still do it in that sort of circumstance. So, and Watkins, he's obviously fine. If people want to get him for his consistency, because they know they're going to want him in game week 3, absolutely fine. Lee was obviously massively high on Leon Bailey last week on Correspondent Week. And you can see why looking at the data. I know Mark and Az on Black Box last night covered off the real difference between Bailey sort of in home games and away games. And you would be conscious that the first home game's Arsenal. So are there better 6.5 million assets over the first 3? I think there probably are. But it's another one you might want to drop to him in game week 3 or move to him, for example. I think defensively, they're largely an overlook, I think, Suj.
Yeah, for me, definitely. Yeah.
Despite those 4.5 prices, when we saw Consort 4.5, I think we look deeper and go, it's not enough attacking returns. And even for a side to finish 4th, he was still under 100 points, despite starting 35 games last year. One Villa defender to keep an eye on this week is Costa Nedjakovic. Probably mispronounced incorrectly. He is 4.0, Suj. It's not improbable that he starts. And he might be one that people want to move to quickly. If you think about that Villa swing in game week 3, if he gets the nod suddenly at right back ahead of Cash, which isn't improbable, you can see a surge for that sort of move. Particularly if something happened with Barco, where it's Well, Barco's not as attractive as I thought it would be. So
Well,
Nedeljkovic
yeah, I don't know. He's
or
a standout 4.0 right now. So whether or not people want two 4.0s, and if they do, there's others that are maybe almost guaranteed starters, Harwood Bellis and stuff. I'm not so keen on risky. If you're going 4.0, what do you expect? 2 points. To get 2 points, you need to be almost a first team, first starter. And for me, yeah, riskiness, I'm not interested. And at any point, if cash can come back, I just don't think this is the time to be really risking it.
he's one
Should we
to
talk about
keep an
Bournemouth?
he's definitely one to keep an eye on though. The closer we get to the season, the more the Villa guys are saying there's every chance he's going to break into this team. That he's really
Okay.
talented as a right back.
Bournemouth, zero interest, zero in my squad, even more emphasized by the fact that Solanke has now left. I do get the point that now the people are saying, look, Semenyo will start up top. He's 5.5 midfielder, so not only is he cheap, he's OOP. But genuinely, if I was picking a 5.5 midfielder, I'd go to Smith Rowe first. I'd go to Minter first. I'd go to Hudson-Odoi first. And then I would probably go to a couple of others before I even looked at Semenyo. So I can see where people think, okay, if he's a striker and he's a 5.5 midfielder, sure. Yeah, not for me.
Yeah, I think it's probably largely an overlooked. Senesi might have got injured at the weekend. Probably going to be okay, but it's something to bear in mind going towards the weekend. Not that you'd have picked him, but that will make Bournemouth a bit weaker defensively. Probably the new lad Hoyson will probably have to go straight into the team. He's also very talented. I think Semenyo, Sinistera, and Cliver are all in a sort of bracket of one of them will probably do well. Yeah, good luck guessing which one. That's how it feels to me. I think with Newcastle and Chelsea, the first two home games doesn't overly appeal. We know they're going to invest. Neil Grover was really clear on that when we recorded him last week. So they've really got a new right back coming in from Barcelona. We believe we're pretty confident they're going to buy another forward. So yes, Semenyo, if Enes Unal is still unavailable, may well start up front against Nottingham Forest at the weekend. Justin Kluivert may well be on the mins. Lewis on the pens. Luis Sinisterra at 5 could well get a significant minute, but I feel like that's a watch and wait.
Agreed. Brentford, now we've talked about Ethan Pinnock being one of the best 4.5 defenders, potentially. Fleckens, obviously, you've had a lot of talk at 4.5 as well. And Bomo, Tony, all pretty consistent FPL assets in the past. Really, game week 6 is when we should be looking at Brentford when their fixtures change. I think the biggest thing from the weekend was Carvalho, right? Coming in at 20 million pounds. He's what, 5 million from my memory in FPL.
He is.
Playing in that number 10 position with Mbomo to the right, whether it's Sade or Visser on the left, maybe Tony up in front of him. Yeah, I need to see it, and I need to see him get the minutes and get the returns. But it's going to be easy to get to if and when for game week 5. No Brentford interest other than probably Pinnock for me right now. If I decided that I just wanted to leave somebody in there, say I've got Greaves in there right at the moment from Ipswich, and I've got 500,000. And I don't want that. And I think, let me just get Pinnock now and leave him. And then I don't have to worry about making that transfer in 5 or 6. I might just do that. And then I can always play him in, I think it's 1 and 3. They've got better fixtures, right? And then Carvalho further down the road could be of interest as well. Definitely. By game week 5, I can see myself with a couple. For game week 1, maybe one Pinnock, but not anything else.
Yeah, I think they're largely a monitor. Flecken's the highest 4.5 owned goalkeeper at the moment. If people are taking a long-term view on their 4.5 goalkeeper, I have absolutely no problem with that. Also, I think he's proving quite popular because, as said earlier, a lot of the goalkeepers have really good alternatives in the defense. I don't think Ethan Pinnock is strong enough to. Oh, Pinnock is definitely better than Flecken. I don't think it is. So I think that's why he's really popular at the moment. I do think it's one looking at the long term. They drew 4-4 with Wolfsburg last week, and they're not looking great defensively at the moment. Still really missing, obviously, Henry and Hickey in the fullback areas. They're playing Rosler probably on the right. Christopher Aguero probably play left back at the moment. The midfield 3 is probably the favoured, most likely be Norgard, Jensen and Janelt. That's strong for them. but his weakness is defensively. Carvalho coming in just muddies it even more up front. The only forward I'd be comfortable going with is Bumo. Who's 7 million, I think will be really popular once we get around to sort of about game week 6 potentially. Obviously, if Tony goes, it's probably going to take over the pens as well. I think that's quite nicely priced at 7. If they had really good opening fixtures, and it's worth saying their home games are still great, then I think his ownership would be a lot higher at that price. We still think Tony will probably go before the end of the window. Tom was really high on Kevin Sade on Correspondent Week, but if Tony's going to start, is Visser going to go to the left? I just wouldn't. I think one of Visser or Sade could be quite good, sort of inside the opening 3, but I wouldn't like to guess which one. It could be that both play regularly. Obviously, if Tony goes, but while Tony's there, he's just going to eat minutes. Bumo's the only one there to go forward offensively at the moment.
Brighton and Hove Albion Seagulls. I have 2 into my squad. James Barco's been there for a while, ever since he kind of emerged as a really talented left back, left wing back. People are now even talking about him keeping Estupiñán out of the team because he's playing that well. So he's pretty much been a lot, and I've no reason to want to move him on. One change that I did make over the weekend, I had 2 6.5 million midfielder slots in my midfield, and Nkunku had pretty much tied up one of them. The other I downgraded to Minter at 5.5. I mean, a goal and assist again at the weekend, was it for him? He's just clocking up returns all pre-season, and I don't see how he's going to get dropped out of that team. One of the things you mentioned in Correspondent Week was how his ceiling is ridiculous. He could just explode. I quite fancy taking the punt on Minter, so I think I'm going to do that. He's going to stay in at 5.5 for me.
Yeah, I watched the highlights of their victory over Villarreal at the weekend. Looked really good. Looked like it could have got more than 4, actually. Played with a really offensive front 4, basically, of Minter, João Pedro, Welbeck, and Minter. Minter at 5.5 is certainly in that category of 5.5 million midfielders consider. I think the saving on him versus Mitoma at the moment would probably rule Mitoma out. But Karim Mitoma, he's still worth keeping an eye on. This time last year, a lot of us were going there. Admittedly, their fixtures last year were much better than they are now. João Pedro's fit. That's the big difference from the Brighton pod with Sam last week, was we didn't think he probably would be. The information we had, he's played at the weekend, he's scored twice, looks really good. I quite like the idea for him as well of playing up front with Welbeck, because Welbeck will take a lot of the pressure off him, might free him up some more space as well. And I think, as discussed with them, those starting in the deeper roles might actually end up being better offensively and as fantasy assets for Brighton this year. So you got Minter, João Pedro, and Mitoma attacking it from slightly deeper. I don't think that Herzl has. I'd said this to you last week. I don't think he's got the players that he truly wants at the moment to play the way he really wants to. So don't think we're looking at them like necessarily exactly what we saw from him at St. Pauli at the moment. He might be a little bit more of a more traditional back 4 in their makeup, but they're really offensive once they go forward. They really commit bodies into the box. You can see that. So Minter, João Pedro, well worth considering. Barco is the best 4.0 in the game, as far as I'm concerned. There's not a reason not to punt it. The chances are you're not going to use it or need it for many. Some might end up using him this weekend away to Everton. That's fine. It's definitely going to start. As you said, there's a growing feeling amongst Brighton fans that he's doing well enough that Estupiñán won't get straight back in necessarily when he's available. So that's the one that could go off and be really good. If I was going to 4.0, he'd be going in. I don't think there's too much to debate there on him.
Yeah, sometimes you get players that are good regardless of value, and we get hooked on like, well, they're a 4 million or they're a 4.5. Just look at it as straight. Are they going to get points? And there's good potential for him to do that. So I'm kind of looking at him in that way as well. Chelsea.
Just a reminder, when you overcommit on them, though, they've got all of the expected top 7 inside the opening 11 weeks. So it's a tough fixture list. There are a couple of good ones in there, 4 and 5 we've looked at before, Ipswich and Nottingham Forest at home together. But generally, it's quite a tough run of fixtures. So that's why you'd rule out paying an extra for, say, Mitoma as well at the moment, I think.
Yeah, and are they rotatable? That's the question I guess you got to ask yourself. I've got Barco in there, but Barco's rotatable for me.
Oh,
He's
of
not like
course.
one of my
He should be your
starting
cheapest
11. Whereas
defender.
Minter, he's probably more of a starter because I've got a cheaper midfielder that we'll talk about later. Chelsea. Now, a lot of Chelsea's ownership is sucked into Robert Sanchez. Still has some ownership. He's just over 4% owned. But when they've got 6 keepers listed in the game, and one of them still Kepa Arrizabalaga, you've got Cucurella's got a little bit of ownership, but other than that, it's Cole Palmer and Christopher Nkunku. I'm going Nkunku. I'm going to avoid Cole Palmer, despite me thinking he's one of the best players in the league. Not for FPL at that price for me. And I'm avoiding defensively like the plague.
So a little bit more information yesterday, because obviously he played the second half. He played off the right and drifted inside in the same way
When you
that
say he, just clarify.
Cole Palmer, sorry.
Yep.
Drifted inside as you'd have seen him do previously for Chelsea. Because a lot of the conversation with Gary on Correspondent Week was, we're not
Where's he
sure
gonna play?
where
Yeah.
exactly that. So, and that's not to say definitively he's going to play where he played last year, but really interestingly, what they did to compensate, because obviously Maresca really wants his wide players generally to hold the touchline. Palmer's not that type of player. You want him coming into sort of high 8-10 positions in the half spaces on the right. They did push Malo Gusto back up the right-hand side. Now, it's City at the weekend, and we kind of said this time last week, Gusto, absolute no-go. Reece James has obviously, unfortunately, suffered another injury, so no one's going to be there in game week 4. It's highly unlikely he's going to be back for that. There might be a relationship there with Gusto and Palmer to really keep an eye on, but I think it's really important to say, because a lot of people will invest in Chelsea, I think, from game week 2, once the City game's out of the way. What happens against City doesn't necessarily tell you what's going to happen for the fixtures afterwards. It's different based, and the fixtures I've got afterwards are obviously much better on paper. I think Gusto might have come back onto just keep an eye on it at 5.0. I wouldn't start with him though, but one to keep an eye on, I think, from next week. Yeah, it's just Palmer and Nkunku, Suj, in terms of consideration for me. Under what I'm intending to do, it'll probably be neither, but they might both be in my team once the deadline's gone. is a strong possibility. I just think Nkunku's going to be worth the saving.
Yep.
Is my take. It's too big, down to 4 million. There is overnight speculation that they're going in for João Felix again. I presume they're bored. They haven't bought anyone for a day and a half or something. Probably by the time we put this out, they'll have signed someone else. And that's always a problem investing in Chelsea. So
I just bought Neto, man, for 56 million.
Yeah.
I don't
I mean,
get it.
Neto's a great player. Neto's probably staying fit.
I don't,
We know that.
it's not about whether Neto's good or not and whether the price is fair. It's just the volume of Chelsea signings just doesn't seem to make any sense.
And there's that's a prime example as well, right? So Neto can play left or right. We think Raheem Sterling's probably him. Is either going to be him or Mudrik's going to get the favoritism on the left. I suspect because of his defensive diligence, Sterling will maybe get the nod at the weekend. Now, if he does well and scores and looks lively, great. I don't even think it necessarily carries on till game 2. So I find it difficult personally that I'll be looking at anything bar and Nkunku and Palmer come next week. Defensively at the moment, it's just an avoid. I think even the situation has changed of what we thought from the last game to this game, with bearing in mind what I've just said about Gusto, and it might change from City to Wolves in game 2 as well.
Let's talk about the Eagles, Crystal Palace. Obviously, Dean Henderson is up there as quite highly owned as a 4.5 alongside Flecken, because we know he is now first choice. The talks of Sam Johnson's going to be moving on. He's in just under 9% of teams. I think if I was looking defensively, for me, I'd find a way to get to Munoz at 5. I just think he's one where it's going to be worth the extra for the attacking output. And I think I might find a way of getting that extra money. I can understand when people don't have the money, it becomes a bit of a problem. But I think Munoz is definitely one to look at. Eze's ownership's high, man, 33%. Understandable, because that's 7 million. It's too cheap, really. If they have the same form as they did the last 10, 15 games under Glasner, Eze at 7 million is too cheap. And you could argue that Mateta at 7.5 is also too cheap. but I could quite comfortably. I'd rather go to Solanke knowing that Spurs is going to be all out attack, and then move to Mateta than start with Mateta and then need to find a way to get to Solanke. Yeah,
It's probably
they're well
more,
priced Palace assets,
yeah.
and the fixtures are pretty decent as well, especially the first two to start with.
There's some really interesting takeaways, and I think we've learnt a few more bits from the weekend as well on Palace, which is really important. I'll clarify.
Oh, I should have added as well, James. We learned from Correspondent Week that everybody listens to us because Kamada's ownership has skyrocketed,
Has it?
0.5% now.
Oh wow, great. Was he 0.1? Was he?
He might well have been. I have no idea, but it
It's
just proves that maybe people don't listen as much.
well, if people are listening anyway, it might drop a bit deeper. In terms of ownership, because although Rory was really high on him last week, a little bit less after yesterday, because he played as the right-sided 10 rather than left-sided 10. And he felt he just, even though he scored, he felt he wasn't as effective in that position as he had been in the previous friendlies. And that's, of course, because main man Eze is back in. So Rory wasn't convinced that Eze would start game week 1. Rory would tell you now that Eze will almost certainly start in game week 1, having started the game yesterday. So that's a change. So he thinks that as an impact of Eze being back, Kamada not quite as interesting. I just think there's so many good 5.5 million options. Once I'd seen him say to the guys on Slack yesterday, not quite as good. That's off the table for me now. That's not going to be the one, actually. Mateta, we don't think starts, right? Obviously, he played in the Olympic final on Friday. That went to extra time. It's not a problem. The game's not till Sunday. But at this stage, we don't even know if he's going to come straight back or not. Also, the Palace guys keep telling me that Edouard's done quite well in pre-season, and it would actually be quite harsh on him not to get the start at Brentford in game 1. To go back to your Eze point, because he had been a player for me that I was very reluctant to start with for 2 reasons. One, is he going to be available to start in game week 1? 2, we know that there is a release clause, and Manchester City have just got Julian Alvarez money, and there's nothing to say that City just won't go, bosh. What if City go on Saturday? The game's not till Sunday. What if City go on Saturday? Bosh, there's your money. It's not impossible. I think that's obviously really unlikely. And I think the case to start with Eze has certainly grown. But if you are looking anything more than 1-2 weeks, he might be playing for a different team. Oh, he's playing for City, 7 million. Yeah, but is he going to walk straight in the team? Oh, he's going to Tottenham. Is he going to, he certainly would get in the Tottenham team. Is he going to walk into it straight away when there's Madison, Kulusevski to compete with? And also Tottenham have got difficult fixtures, 3, 4, 6, 7. No, I think there's still a good prospect here that Eze is not playing for Palace at the end of the window. If you want him for the weekend and stuff, chances are you're fine. West Ham in 2, they scored 5 in that fixture last year. I've spoken about Brentford's defensive weaknesses. He's fine if you want to go there. I think that ownership is probably higher than I'd be comfortable with, actually. And again, because of what I've just said, he's not going in for me under my strategy at the weekend. On Munoz, what's interesting about him, Suj, is, and I don't really like him as well, and I agree, and he's always the one. But again, it was Tyree Mitchell with the assist yesterday. Again, it keeps happening. Keeps happening. No one talks about Mitchell at all. And I don't think it's necessarily straightforward. What I would say on Munoz is, again, having started yesterday, should be good to go on Sunday at Brentford. Mark Gay started for Palace, despite the obvious links with Newcastle. And as things stand, unless Newcastle or someone else come up with more money, he'll start for them at the weekend. That makes them stronger, obviously. Dean Henderson, I think he's probably the best 4.5 to start with. I think that's going to be safe now. Johnson's going to go.
Yep.
Yeah, I think for a side that's strong defensively, their numbers defensively are way better than Brentford's. I think Dean Henderson is probably the best 4.5.
Let's talk about Everton. I've had Mikalenko in my draft for a while, but I would say I'm lukewarm to cooling on Mikalenko. I may find a way of moving to another 4.5. I don't know what he serves for me, really being there in the squad in the early weeks. Despite Everton still being good defensively, midfield, zero interest for me. My biggest takeaway was seeing Sean talk about Ilman and Dye and kind of, I don't know what he specifically said from memory, but it was more like eyes emojis. This guy looks tasty.
Yeah.
Like if he can lock down that striker position, which he will, because we know Dominic Calvert-Lewin's made of paper mache, at 5.5 could be very interesting.
Well, there's every chance we play together, Suj, for clarity.
Yeah, I mean that as well. But if one of those is going to get injured, it's going to be Dominic Calvert-Lewin.
I think Ndai probably doesn't start at the weekend, but I think he will get into that Everton team. You couldn't pick him over João Pedro at the same price at the moment. No. You couldn't. You know João Pedro is going to play for Brighton. They're playing each other, obviously, this weekend. You couldn't make the case to pick Ndai over him at this moment. I absolutely agree with you. I'd long said since the game opened, I thought Mykolenko was the best 4.5 defender in the game. That opinion is certainly called. That's no longer my opinion. Do I still think he's a very good choice? Yes, absolutely, if you want investment in Everton. Sean, obviously, in Correspondent Week said, look, we start slow, careful. And the more I look at them first four, I do think if Brighton, Bournemouth at home, yeah, they're the sort of sides really capable of giving Everton problems. And it's difficult to kind of assess Bournemouth at the moment because of the Solanke situation they might buy. Tottenham and Villa, 2 tough away games. Yeah, going colder on it, actually. Pickford is obviously one of the best 5.0 options. That's fine. Brentford, we think, is probably not going to be fit for this weekend. So O'Brien will play as a left-sided centre-back. I think Timo Robenham is probably the Everton player to consider most at the moment. He's going to be one of the best 4.5s.
Enabler.
He's going to play, if that's what you're looking for. I really like him, Timo Robenham. Really good reviews of how he played at the weekend as well. They're a bit short at the moment because James Garner's injured, so he almost certainly plays with Idrissa Gana-Gueye. And I think once he locks it, he might keep hold of that place, actually. So I really like Timo Robenham as a 4.5 option. It's not a certainty moving forward, sort of beyond the transfer window and stuff like that. But I'm not sure any 4.5 is. I even include Harry Winks. He's got a very different manager now. So I like Robenham as a 4.5. Can't see me starting with Everton. That includes Mykolenko.
2 questions. You said you don't think he's the best 4.5 defender in the game. Just in one word, who is?
Lewis Hall.
Lewis Hall.
Yep.
And the challenge I have with Ilman and Dye is there's only three attacker slots, man. There's only 3 forwards. So what am I doing? Because Haaland's in for me. Isak's in for me. Now I'm jumping between Solanke, Ollie Watkins, maybe Kai Havertz. I don't know what my strategy would. I go heavy in midfield, but my midfield is full of cheap, incredible options as well. I just don't know what circumstance I'm going to be in where I want to get a really cheap forward.
Let me ask you a question.
Great run from 4 onwards, don't they? 4 or 5 onwards.
All those 5.5 million midfielders, this is taking a step back. All those 5.5 million midfielders, if João Pedro was a midfielder, would you say he's the best 5.5?
Yeah, probably.
But interesting, isn't it?
He doesn't score the points in the same way, right? It's always where that midfield is that extra one that chips in for a clean sheet, the extra point for a goal here and there. All adds up towards the end of the season.
But the BPS is the BPS is loaded more towards the forwards now. Now that goes both ways because then you go, well, yeah, I want 3 more powerful forwards. Get that? I just think the point is if you're going for a 5.5, it's going to be João Pedro. If you're going for a cheap forward at under 6, so I understand if people might go Muniz or Wood, but under that, it's João Pedro. Pretty clear on that to start with.
Cool. Talking about 5.5 midfielders, we move on to Fulham, James. I have 2 Fulham in my team, and they've been in for a little while. I don't actually see myself coming off them. The first is the goalkeeper in Bernd Leno.
Yeah.
Just think for the first 6 or 7, I don't need to rotate him. And even a little bit longer field than that, there's a couple of tough fixtures like Newcastle, you could argue, City, even Aston Villa, but just leave him in there for me. And 5.5 midfielders, Emile Smith-Rowe is also in for me. I can see why people might be wanting to get Muniz because I think at 6 million, he's great value as well. He should probably be at least 500,000 more. And yeah, I think Fulham have got a good run. I can see people wanting to get a couple of bits of Fulham.
Yeah, there's some interest. I think there's 4 interesting players, one in each position. Leno in goal, as you said. I think Anthony Robinson is the clear one defensively. I pushed Lewis James quite hard on Correspondent Week to say, look, what about Timothy Castagne? But Kenny Tete, Played significant minutes in the last friendly, so there's enough there that you don't need to take the chance. So Robinson are defenders. Of the midfielders, I'd be pretty clear Smith Rowe over Pereira. I think there is a chance that Pereira still starts at United on Friday. They may play together, which is ambitious, but it might be what they do. And obviously Pereira, we think, would be on the pens at the moment. There is still a lot of speculation though that he could go Pereira before the end of the window, and I'd be really wary of that. If you're debating that Smith Rowe versus Pereira, I think that's enough to go Smith Rowe if you want to start with one of them. And obviously Muniz up front at 6 million. I think he's probably the better choice than Chris Wood at the same price. Purely as well, I've said it a few times. If you get stuck, you are more comfortable because I think people keep looking at the first three with these two players specifically. If you get stuck, you're going into game week 4 onwards. So like Muniz got West Ham at home, Newcastle at home, Forest away, whereas Wood's walking into suddenly Liverpool away and a Brighton team. It's also an away game that might improve quite a bit defensively. So I think that's Muniz. If you get stuck on it, that's the one you'd rather stick with. And Lewis was absolutely firm that Fulham had no interest in buying another forward, whereas I wouldn't trust Nottingham Forest not to do so. So I think it's Muniz over Wood if you're looking in that particular position. Shout out to Hindu Monkey and his Muniz Express. I told him it should be the Muniz train, but whatever, if he's happy with that. So Muniz at 6 million is good. Smith Rowe at 5.5, Robinson, Leno. I think the four of them are all really good options to start with. I think the Leno over Robinson one, I don't mind that, Suj, because we keep saying that about the 5 million keepers over which 4.5. And there's always, with the fives, there's always a 4.5 option that you might make a case is worth the saving. So you have to make the decision somewhere if you're going to a 5 million goalkeeper. And yeah, I think that might be the right one, Suj, actually. I don't mind that going Leno over Robinson. I think that's fine.
Let's talk about Ipswich. I haven't still considered too much with Ipswich. I put Greaves in literally just on Paul and your say so as the best Ipswich 4.0, but I don't think I'll end up with two 4.0 defenders in Barker and Greaves. I take the point on Muric. Obviously, he made saves last season when he was at Burnley, so he might be one that if people want a 4.5, but I don't see how you'd pick him over Henderson with their fixtures or Flecken. Yeah, no Ipswich for me. Not interested.
So they changed system on Saturday. And they played a back three. Now, a lot of what they do moves into a back three. Leif Davis from left back, very much pushing in. She started with a back three at the weekend. And despite playing 3 centre-backs, Jacob Greaves wasn't one of them. Now, I think it was just a case of trying players in that system. I've checked with the Ipswich guys and girls on our Patreon that, don't worry, he'll play. But enough there to make you go, ooh. And obviously, the player that played right wing back in this scenario was Ben Johnson. So suddenly you could make a case to say, yeah, go Johnson over Greaves, maybe. I said to you last week, I think of the 4.0s from the promoted teams, I would want to start with an Ipswich player off the three. That's how I feel. I think if I had to do one now...
Opinion?
Sorry, what?
Still the same opinion?
I think I'd go Johnson now. Just a little bit over Greaves, yeah. I just think it's strange that he didn't start on Saturday. So okay. I'd probably go Johnson. So I think of the 4.0s from the promoted teams, that's the one I'd probably go for is Johnson if people want to do that. So yeah, probably him. Offensively is difficult at the moment to make. With the first 2 fixtures they've got, you're coming back to it.
Yeah,
I think Ipswich fans will start with the likes of Hutchinson and Delap possibly. That's fine. I think that's for the rest of us to come back and look at. We've got a really good run of fixtures from game week 3, but the first 2 are abysmal. I don't know how you could pick
Liverpool and City.
I don't know how you could pick Hutchinson as the 5.5 off the bat. Basically, you couldn't. So Ben Johnson would be the one, I think. Just over Greaves.
I'd quite like to own Ben Johnson just for nostalgia from West Ham point of view, but I'm not bothered. I don't need it. It would be the dumbest, stupidest reason to own an asset in FPL that ever has existed, because he used to play for my club and he didn't even get any minutes when he was at my club anyway.
For clarity of the people just jumped to the Ipswich bit, yeah, like Barker over Johnson.
100%.
Just for clarity.
100%.
But if you wanted to go both, fine.
Okay. Let's talk about Leicester City. James, do you know? Because a lot of listeners will listen to the audio podcast and maybe not necessarily YouTube. So, do you know what percentage of communication when two people are talking to each other is body language?
What are you saying about Aaron Lago's body language
It's
and
about
correspondent week?
87% is body language, and the other 13% is what you say and how you say it. All I need to know about Leicester City is Aaron's body language isn't the most upbeat when it comes to talking about Leicester at the moment. And the only thing I can say about Leicester is it's more target Leicester than it is own Leicester, sadly. Because I like Aaron and I like Leicester. Some great curry houses up in Leicester, and I spent many a good night up there. But from a footballing point of view, concern, concern, concern.
Yeah, there's a reason why there's 4 Tottenham players sitting in my squad at the moment.
Did you shithouse that on purpose?
Of course. And at the time recorded, Solanke has now changed this morning. So he is in the Tottenham shirt now. So I mean, I've not tried to. I don't think I can make a transfer now. So I genuinely have tried to not lock in my team, but I've tried to do it. I'm going to leave it now till something goes tits up. So yeah, there's 4 Tottenham in there for me at the moment. And it's based on that, isn't it? It's not just what Aaron said, it's what other Leicester fans have been saying, it's what I can see with my eyes as well. And it didn't get helped with their performance at the weekend either, right? Lost 3-0 at Lens in France. They played Justin at right back, which might be, remember what Aaron said about Pereira. So it might be that Pereira's the one that misses out, and they might go Justin at right back, Christensen at left back.
I'm sure Justin's in at 4.5 or 5.
Yeah, I'm not buying it. I'm just saying we'd highlighted that Son versus Pereira could have a lot of fun. I'm just saying that Justin will probably be a more difficult opponent for Son if that's what they do. It's not to put you off. I'm just saying. I guess it's going to be between a Collie and Vestergaard for who partners Wout Faes at centre back. That's not super clear at the moment. I suspect because of the pace we've got, a Collie will probably get the nod there actually. And then that does look a little bit better. One of the positives Aaron did say was like really likes the goalkeeper Hermanson. And there have been some links with some players and linked with a forward. They've also been strongly linked with a loan move for our old buddy Suj, Wilfried Zaha.
Yeah, I saw that as well from Fenerbahce.
I'll tell you what, as well, it's just a note on this. If he did go there, I'm pretty sure he'd be priced up as a midfielder, and I'm pretty sure he would start centre forward for them.
Do you think it'd come in cheap as well? Or do you think because of his historical record, it'd still be like 7 million, 7.5 million?
I just think by virtue of going to Leicester, I can't see I'd be any more than 6 at the most.
That's a good 6 million playing right up top, despite all the other stuff that's going on with Leicester. It'd be one to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, keep an eye on because you couldn't start with any of this. The only ones are going to be, and I get it, like Faes is fine. He is going to play. Harry Winks, 4.5 midfielder. He is going to play. I even pushed Aaron last week on the likes of Hamza Chowdhury if that was better. No, it was pretty clear on Harry Winks. Mavadivi and Fatu will potentially be interesting players. But again, I don't know how you're picking either of them as your 5.5 midfielder of choice. I do have an inkling that Bobby Decordova-Reid might even start up front for them next Monday. If they haven't got anything new added, they're really short at the moment. The preseason form is bad. The philosophy is miles away from what they were doing last year. Suddenly, and there might be a points deduction at any point, suddenly it looks grim. And they come up as champions. They fall into the same line of what happened to Burnley and Sheffield United last year. They've come up and they've got a weaker team than what they got promoted with. That might change in the coming weeks.
I do think they'll pick up loan signings and kind of cobble together something that will work within the Premier League. And Steve Cooper's done it before with Nottingham Forest, where he's kept them up despite
he knows how to do it
against the odds. So they're not down and out, but it doesn't look good. Let's talk about Liverpool. I made one change to my draft at the weekend, which was a tentative change just to see what it would feel like. I sold Mo Salah and bought Diogo Jota. I think I've seen quite a bit of talk that he will play up top as a striker. He's been good in pre-season. He's looking fit. We talked in the debrief about 17 attacking returns and 14 starts last year. The problem there is the 14 starts, of course, but he's fit right now. And the amount of money
Right now, yeah.
and the amount of money it puts in the bank is crazy. Like it turns Greaves, for example, into Trent. And then look at, screw it, I'll have Trent for the first 8, 10 weeks because their fixtures are pretty decent for a long period, Liverpool. I do want one of the defensive and one of the attacking, but I haven't added ever any of the defensive guys. Trent at 7, still a consideration for me. Jota, yes. And maybe go back to Mo Salah if I really want to. But yeah, CBC.
Um, Nearly every Liverpool player is under consideration for me under what I might be doing.
Nearly every Liverpool player that you think will start.
Yeah, well, to be honest, and right at the bottom of that list is Salah. Not because Mo Salah's lost it or anything like that. It's just price. It's price.
Yeah.
5 million more than Jota. And but it's Mo. I know that. We'll talk about it a lot when we do the podcast on Wednesday about captaincy. And I think that's the bit that the Salah owners really need to look at. And listen, you're not going to have a team with Haaland, Salah, Watkins, Isak, Saka, Palmer, Son. Like, it's impossible, isn't it? So there's going to be FOMO somewhere, guys. And I realized that Mo creates bigger FOMO than almost anyone. He and Haaland, and that's why Salah is more expensive than your Sakas and Sons, etc. But I think even without the saving, it's the lack of captaincy would make me just not go there. I mean, I wouldn't even captain him this week. If I was going to captain him this weekend, then yes. And I think those who start with him, that's probably your justification, is you want to captain him this weekend. If that's what you want to do, fine. Jota at 7.5 and Diaz 7.5 look highly likely to start now this weekend. I think Jota is a near certainty. Diaz is close to that as well. The caveat to that is when Gakpo and Nunes enter the fray, and they played in the second match for Liverpool yesterday, it's probably going to be for those two players. So with the minutes that you're probably getting limited. With the preseason Mo's had, he probably does get the 90 this weekend and probably then going into the Brentford game the following week as well. Each Jota and Diaz will get removed first. So you have to factor that in. But I think at 7.5, they're really interesting. Definitely Jota over Diaz for me. Just the historical is what you'd mentioned in terms of the attacking returns per minute. I think Szoboszlai at 6.5 is extremely interesting. I don't even hate that. If someone has decided that's the 6.5 million midfielder they want to start with, you might remember a few weeks ago, Suj, I said to you, one of Szoboszlai or McAllister, I'm pretty convinced is going to be an asset at some point this season. The closer it gets, the clearer it looks like it won't be McAllister. It's more likely to be Szoboszlai. Harvey Elliott at 5.5 is worth keeping an eye on, but he's not the one you could consider starting with. Trent, we now think will start. And at 7 million should be considered. I'm pretty confident it'd be Van Dijk and Quansah as the starting centre-backs. Quansah is 4.5, so you have to do that in your mind as well. Is Trent worth 2.5 million more than Quansah? Quansah specifically obviously needs the clean sheets to be a returning.
Yeah, I think Trent is. For me, that is one where I would say, yeah, Trent is worth the extra if you have it.
It's a lot, 2.5 extra for a defensive comparison. I know, but it is a lot.
Quansah's attacking returns is basically negligible. Trent could score in any which way. Trent's the one that's going to hit big double-digit returns.
But the point being, you can't, if you're looking at other defenders that are popular, right? You can't say Gabriel and Saliba. You can't drop that to anything. Vardiol, you could drop to Lewis. Right, that's really risky. Porro, you can drop 1 million to Van der Ven. The Quansah one to Trent, that's big though, isn't it? Quansah, I've looked at drafts with Quansah in for me this week, and I keep taking him back out because I'm not certain that he starts. I'm about 90% on it, and I don't think that's quite enough for me. But I think for the majority, that's a very decent 4.5 million gamble. I would say Shimikas probably starts this weekend, but Robinson played an hour in...
Robertson.
Did I say Robinson? They sound similar.
You're Robertson. Thinking about cordial. Fancy a bit of squash.
It's one of them days. Long hot summer, mate. Robertson played 60 minutes in this second game for Liverpool yesterday, so I imagine he'll be in the squad this weekend and probably get sort of at least the last 20. I think Shimikas will still start game 1, but I think that probably changes. But again, it's close enough. I can't take. I'd love to get Shimicast this weekend at 5.0. I don't think I can take that gamble.
Let's talk about Manchester City. Question for you, James. He's at 2.4% ownership right now. What will Oscar Bob start the weekend at?
Well, similar.
Yeah,
I think.
I agree. I don't think a lot will steam in, but it is flavor of the month right now.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I was listening to Mark last night. I was talking about people maybe only having one City attacker in game week 2 if they obviously just went Haaland, didn't go Bob. And I was thinking, I might have 3 on what I'm doing, Mark. But all right, love that. Yeah, Bob at 5 million. If I was starting at that value, I'd start with that over Rodgers. If I could, I would get that in over any 4.5 because of what it could be. And it's still cheap enough that if it don't work, it slides back to the bench. I don't think people are going to get too done too early with oh my God, I need free City. It feels like, because if you were starting with free City going into this weekend, it's difficult to think at this moment that it wouldn't just be Vardy, Bob and Haaland.
Yeah.
So I
I've
don't
got
see
Guardiola and Haaland that are in for me. So Bob is a real luxury.
I don't see the panic or the rush to get to say Foden next week. I think that's quite unlikely. I think it's more likely people would want Bob. We've got Arsenal in 5, Newcastle 6. I don't think there'll be a desperation to get to a Foden or De Bruyne, is my point.
I
There,
do think
there might be. It only takes one good game, don't get me wrong.
yeah, one thing
People
that's
want
being
it.
overlooked a little bit is more. I mean, we've had times where Foden has been playing so well, scoring goals and assists, and people are like he's playing too well for Pep to rest him or drop him, and Pep has rotated him. I don't buy the argument ever with Pep that he's playing so well that Pep won't take him out of the team right now, because Pep does and has with players that are more consistent and more established than Oscar Bob. He's done it with Foden, he's done it with Bernardo or Gundogan. Pep will do what Pep wants to do, regardless. Doku could play really well, goals and assists. He could not play the next game because that's what Pep does. So I'm not holding any sway by the argument that he's playing too well for Pep to drop him.
I really recommend, and I must shout Luke Williams, this FPL, who I saw responded to someone last night in response to comments made by Sam Lee in The Athletic about City's attacking players. And Luke had said, watch the video. It's only like a 5-minute video from after, obviously, the game on Saturday. And the translation wasn't quite what Pep said. And that's important. So he was talking about where people could play. So it was kind of sold as like, oh, it's Bob and Savinho on the right, and it's Grealish and Doku on the left. What he actually said was he's quite happy for Savinho and Doku could play either side. Bob is right, Grealish is left. And he also obviously added in that Bernardo Silva can play right as well. One key thing that he said about Savinho, which was a takeaway for me, and I don't think it matters too much now, but he said one of the things that they specifically looked at with Savinho was his ability to play games in quick succession. Could he play twice in 3 or 4 days? And he said that Guardiola said that's one of the reasons they bought him. That tells to me that there's an intent at some point to get him in the team. Me and Clates did a piece on him a few weeks ago, and I said, you can see the shades of Mahrez in him. He's going to wear 26. As soon as you've seen him, if you haven't yet, that's what you're going to think a little bit. That's the threat. It's obviously raw. It's not a full, mature Riyad Mahrez, right? It's a lot more raw. That's the impact of the threat potentially to Bob on that side. And also, as Johnny always says, he loves to stick Bernardo on the right when it's big games. Chelsea away is a big game. Oscar Bob is not a certain starter this week. I would say yes, highly likely. If I predict the City team, he's in it, 100%. No, I do think he plays against it. I do think he plays against Ipswich.
Right?
I have
if
a
you're
way
to buy
though.
him, you're happy to bench this week and have him ready for Ipswich. So I can.
No,
I
you
can
don't have to
totally
bench
get
him
that.
this week. I'll tell you what as well. I
You
looked
don't
at
have
the team.
to, but if you were kind of nervous about his minutes, you can.
I tell you what, I looked at a team, yeah, and I need to look at it in case my bench boost idea falls apart. And he would be in it if I didn't bench boost. He would go in, and I'd have a 4.5 with him as well. But I'd probably start with a back four this weekend, which is quite interesting. And yes, probably Bob would be first sub, but then yeah, I would start him in game week 2. So he wouldn't be
Should we
my
go?
cheapest.
No. Should we go to the other side of Manchester? Manchester United obviously lost on the Community Shield.
Holland will talk about a lot Wednesday for clarity in terms
Captaincy.
of captaincy.
Yeah.
And I think Vardio is worth the extra. Rico Lewis, you might be lucky and get starts game week 1. Vardio is worth paying the extra over all those 5.5s.
100% agree. Anything from Manchester United take your fancy at all? I mean, Bruno is Mr. Consistent at 8.5, but I would pick Odegaard over him just because the potential is bigger with Odegaard for me. But
Gary
he is
said the
clearly
same. Gary
talismanic.
Robinson. Yeah.
Garnacho's great at 6.5, but there's so many options in that. I don't know if he's necessarily the one to go to. Yeah, I don't know. I'm probably just picking more the team than the players with Manchester United and saying I don't like the team, therefore I'm not going to own any of the players. It's a little bit blinkered. I wouldn't take my kind of approach to it or attitude towards it. It's probably wrong.
Yeah, I'd love to have Fernandez this week on what I want to do because I know I'm getting the 90 odd minutes. I've got a penalty taker. They've got a decent fixture at home to Fulham. He's possibly just going to miss out for me, not because I don't want him. It's just fitting everything else in that I do. And I think Garnacho is probably going to miss out as well. I'm just not that confident on the start. I know he scored at the weekend. He came on as a substitute. Obviously been away at the Copa America. There's additional travel involved in that. I think he probably does start, but I don't know if I want to take that risk. I therefore don't know if that's the 6.5 midfielder that I want to start with, but I think he's a great option. If you've identified you want to hold him longer term, say like a lot of people are doing now with Nkunku, then start with him because he's certainly going to play. You can obviously play left or right. I think defensively, it's largely a void at the moment, particularly when Matsurawi we think is coming in and Matthias de Ligt's probably going to come in as well. So that situation is going to change. So that possibly even impacts maybe Diogo Dalot moving forward. So anything longer than perhaps say like Dalot and Onana would be considerations for me. And I don't mind if people pick Onana as their 5.0, but I think the defenders largely would just be a complete avoid now. Fernandez and Garnacho are the only two midfielders of interest. Therefore, you know that's a Marcus Rashford hat-trick sealed on Friday night to start the season, so right? But no, I wouldn't be going anywhere near. Rashford is no interest to me at the moment.
No. Newcastle, we can move on to now. Isak with 55% ownership, I think, speaks for himself. You mentioned Lewis Hall as the best 4.5, which I'm going to just take as low. We know his Trips is not available, is he?
I mean, Trips doesn't impact outside. Trips only plays left back for England.
He's playing on the left. Sorry. So over Dan Burn, Lewis Hall, size big on him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
attacking output for Lewis Hall.
Yeah. Every chance. I was obviously really high on him in Correspondent Week last week. And I pushed him a lot on, good Burn play at left back if Gay comes in and Livramento can cover that side if Trippier stays and all these things. It's just become clearer and clearer since actually. I'd be surprised if there's many patrons are not going to start the season with Lewis Hall. Let me sum it up like that to you. I don't think there's any Newcastle fan in our patron network isn't going to start with Lewis Hall. And when I say there's multiple, I mean there's multiple and they're not in doubt. It's 100%. No, they don't even want to say 95 or 99%. They're all 100%. He will play game week 1 and he's going to play regularly. Told you like what Sai said. Sai thinks he'll get into the England squad really quickly. So I think that's the one. The reason
lovely.
Not to
2.2%, man. That's a lovely little differential to have.
The reason not to go for him specifically, considering the fixtures have got the start are decent as well, right?
Very good.
The reason not to go there would be is if you've deemed Nick Pope as your goalkeeper.
Okay.
That's basically the number one reason not to start with him. So I think most people, in my opinion, should start with one or Pope or because I actually think Pope's the best 5 as well. But then do you want to do that? And then you can't ever have Gordon, for example, right? You want to leave that option open if you're not starting with him. So I think one or the other for most people. And yeah, that's the conclusion I've now come to. Lewis Hall's the best 4.5. These Geordies are adamant. So if they're wrong, it's all on them, right? And I'm not going up there till the end of the month. So, whoops. No, they're so confident on Lewis Hall, his ability, his quality, and his potential to be a fantasy asset. He finished the season really well. They're so confident on him. And the fact that I don't think we know, some people are like, oh, why not Livramento? We're not sure if Livramento is going to start. It could be Trips. And I'm fairly sure Trips might still go. And I do think Livramento will start, by the way. Don't need to have that argument. And the guys think Hall will have bigger output than Livramento anyway, the Newcastle guys. So I'm going to take their word on it. So yeah, Hall and Pope, I think great options. So I said last week, like if you've got Burn, move it to Hall, and he's not in any doubt about that. If a Mark Gay does still come in, eventually it's Dan Burn will probably come out the team. Fabian Schär picked up an injury last week at the weekend, sorry, but that's usual for him. And then he'll play the next game, even tweeting himself straight after the game. So yeah, see you next week. So we think he's fine. Isak is shooing for most people. I'll be captaining him this week unless there's some form of injury concern. Very comfortable with that.
What do we do with the midfield then, James? Because Gordon's over 30% owned still. Too risky for me at 7.5 to start with him. I'll go back to it later.
The problem is, and again, sorry, Black Box on my mind because I watched it last night. A really good show with Mark and Az. They obviously highlighted, which we all knew, but Mark kind of laid it out for everyone to see. The difference in the home and away data for Anthony Gordon is quite remarkable. You thought it would level out and it didn't. And do you know what? It might swing completely wildly the other way this year. But if he doesn't start against Southampton, and then you have 3 out the next 4 away, and the 2 home games are Tottenham. I know they've scored 10 in their last 2 against us at St James's, and then Manchester City as the home games. But what are you truly potentially missing out on? Now, we know his capability, right? But he only played 45 minutes across those 2 games at the weekend. I don't know if that's enough to know that he'll start against Southampton. So again, for me, in my scenario, I don't want to go there. What I'd add on to it and say is he'll definitely get on the pitch. And one of our Newcastle patrons summed it up quite well and said, well, if he gets an hour or if he gets the last half hour, it's probably the same thing. As in, he's just as likely to return in the last half hour than the first hour of him starting. So like, he could even be a substitute and can still return. Absolutely get that. So if you truly definitely want Anthony Gordon, fine. I would say him start. I think he'll probably start personally. But I don't think it's a 90 minutes when you got Harvey Barnes there as well. And a few of the guys, Sai did clarify because I asked him on Correspondent Week last week to update us. And I did share his tweet. He's 55-45 in favour of Barnes starting. He doesn't have any doubt, and neither do I, on what I think is the best 5.5 million specifically for my strategy in game week 1, and that's Jacob Murphy. Going in for me on what I intend to do. I don't necessarily advise that for others because I think there's a fair chance Newcastle could buy in that position. But yeah, Murphy is, again, they'll tell you he's 100%. He will definitely start over Almiron on the right-hand side. It's probably not 90 minutes, but it'll be a good chunk of the game. And I've got a great fixture at the weekend. So I really like Jacob Murphy at 5.5. I probably would not go him if I was looking longer term. But he falls into the category that considered. If Newcastle don't buy in that position, he will play the majority of the games there. Eddie Howe really likes him. And that's another one to put into the category. Again, if you look at his attacking returns per minutes and stuff, he's good, Suj. And they're saying he'll start. Listen, if Hall and Murphy don't start this weekend, then I've had a disastrous start to this season.
Shut down the Newcastle Slack channel.
Those 2 are probably literally going to be part of my bench boost.
So. Let them go and find a home in one of the other channels.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Just start a Sunderland channel just to take the piss if that's what happens at the weekend.
No, I told you, I'm going up there at the end of August, so I don't really want to completely
do it after that then.
Yeah.
Nottingham Forest, James, a team that have a great run of fixtures at the start. Hudson-Odoi was sitting there for a while for me, but he became Minter for me. So now I'm not owning any Nottingham Forest assets, but there are plenty. Like if anybody did have one, I don't feel like talking them out of it or what have you. I think it's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Again, now that Solanke's gone as well, obviously that fixture does look a little bit better in game week 1. So Wood and Gibbs White are not completely out the running for me. Hudson-Odoi owners would be massively put off by the fact that he didn't start the last friendly last Thursday against Olympiacos. I'm pretty sure he will start, but as per what Mark said on Correspondent Week last week, he's going to be like probably first off when they make attacking changes and stuff like that. So you're not getting the minutes you necessarily want. I think it boils down to the following. I think there's good options across the board actually at Forest. So Sells in goal will probably start, but we know they want to buy a goalkeeper. And the underlying Forest numbers defensively since Nuno took over are much better than where we perceived them to be in the table. So I can understand why people would look at that. But until that keeper's in, or we know that they're not getting another keeper, I don't want to look at it. Defensively, Nico Williams has now been linked with a move potentially to Atalanta. I would actually favour probably Ola Aina as the choice. Nikola Milenkovic would probably be Mark's one from Forest. That's what he said last week. Murillo will obviously play as well. We're just talking for fantasy. But would I pick any of them over Hall, for example? No. Is Gibbs White a good choice? Yeah. Is he the best 6.5? My opinion, no.
No.
Do I like Wood as a potential option? Yeah. Do I prefer Muniz? Yeah. And that's it. I just don't think that they're ever quite the best option, despite having a few good options. Fixtures are good, not just the first three, but longer term, sort of up to roundabouts game week 10. So if people want to go down that route, it's fine. I just think each time there's better players at the same price points in different clubs.
Let's go to Southampton. I think the ownership stats basically give you everything you need to know about Southampton. No ownership in the goalkeepers, no ownership over 1% in the midfielders, and that includes Brereton Diaz, although I would say that he's a late addition, so he hasn't had time to get any ownership. Adam Armstrong has a little bit at 2.5% as a 5.5 million striker, but we talked about João Pedro and maybe even Ilman and Dye becoming definitely better options. The only two players with any ownership are Harwood Bellis, because he's 4.0, and Taylor, because he's 4.0. And obviously that includes some points that he would have scored at Burnley. So if you're filtering, that's what they're going with. No ownership anywhere. But I do think Brereton Diaz to keep eyes on is probably the one.
Yeah, if that Newcastle clean sheet does go bust this weekend, I hope it's Brereton Diaz that busts it. That's a player I want next week. If I'm bench boosting,
then he'll go up in
wildcarding.
Price. So you don't want him to score, James?
Well, I might be wildcarding Friday night, Suj, so.
Yeah, true. You buy him straight away.
Exactly, mate. Yeah, very interested, I think, particularly in Brereton Diaz from game week 2 for me. Really good run of fixtures afterwards. I really like that as an option. I think I probably prefer it over Armstrong. Again, now that João Pedro's fit, probably prefer that. Whereas Brereton Diaz feels more like I could take on Minter and the other 5.5s more with him. I said to him, the one difference with him I really liked to the other 5.5s is that known ability of him in front of goal that he could do it. And to be fair, if you've seen Minter in pre-season, you'll think similar. But Brereton Diaz is by trade a number 9, really. And it might be that in some of these early fixtures they go 3-5-2 and that's where he plays. I really like him as an option at 5.5 actually. I really, really do. As soon as you get after 1, there's good fixtures. I don't want any of them defensively. No interest. I think they'll concede goals. I think they may add players. Interesting, Cole Walker-Peters, who we'd said last week we thought was probably going to go, did play left back of a back 5 at the weekend with Stevens in between. Harwood Bellis and Bednarek and Sugawara played the right back / right wing back position. I tell you what else I thought about Brereton Diaz in comparison to, say, Brighton. I think people would like to go Minter. I completely get that. And Brighton will score more goals than Southampton. That's clear. When I look at that front 4, though, of Mitoma, Welbeck, João Pedro, and Minter, it feels like they could go off at any given time and the one you have might do nothing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I look at that Southampton team that played at the weekend and I think if it's not Brereton Diaz or Armstrong, I don't see where the returns are in that team at all. Like a midfield 3 of Aribo, Downs and Smallbone in front of the 5 that I just said. I'm like, where is that? So I really think there'll be a big reliability on those 2 up front to get the returns specifically. I think Brereton Diaz might do really, really well.
Okay. Let's talk about Spurs. I think Spurs is an interesting one because You're obviously only allowed to own 3 players. I think Solanke now at 7.5 becomes really, really interesting with the first 2 fixtures, as does Pedro Porro. I think those two are kind of like, if you had to pick your 2 best Spurs assets, I think they would be the 2 that I would go with, which then basically makes the question, which other one, as opposed to which Spurs assets are almost any good. I had Bergwijn in for a long time, James, at 4.5, and I still think he's potentially one of the best 4.5s. If you like a little bit of fun, rather than your 2 appearance points every week that you might get with Harry Winks. If you want the player that's your 4.5 that might come off the bench and pick up attacking returns, then I'd still go there. But for me, Porro, Solanke, you could go any. The keeper's fine, right? You've got good fixtures for a prolonged period. Vicario, there's nothing wrong with that. If you ain't got the money and you had to go to a doggy, nothing particularly wrong with that. I'm just not a big fan of the midfielders in the way that maybe you are, like Brennan Johnson at 6.5 or Kula at 6.5. That stuff doesn't interest me as much. Maybe because I have Solanke in there.
It does for the guy who might bench boost this weekend and they're playing that.
Yeah, I get it for the first 2, and I'm obviously on a different strategy. So just longer term.
For me, it's not. This weekend hasn't been a case of which other one, has it? It's been a case of which other 2. Because I don't know if this is something to remember for people for future's sake as well. And maybe now I'll say this and other people pick up on it. It might change. But it became fairly clear that Solanke wasn't going to get updated to a Tottenham player till today. It was going to get left out. No one was there in the office to press the button over the weekend on flags or anything. It was really clear. So I think most of us who wanted to try and get for Tottenham knew that we probably had the whole weekend to do it. And that's what I've been trying to do. So yeah, Solanke's in at the minute. Son's in at the minute. Porro's an absolute given, as I've said several times over. The agony on the 4th one's such brutal. It's brutal. I will tell you that Kulusevski is in there at the moment. A lot of the questions I had after tweeted, obviously, about Solanke signing Saturday morning was, well, what does it mean for the team now? And I was like, well, let me watch the game Saturday night and it'll give us a clearer indication. Yeah, that shit didn't do nothing for us. So it's got really, really, I think it's almost more complicated. I'll sum it up to you like this. I think between Solanke, Johnson, Kulusevski, Maddison, 3 of them start. It's not unthinkable that it's all 4. But I think any one of them 4 could miss out.
Yep.
All the logic would tell me that Kulusevski is the one that misses out. On what I've seen on my eyes, he's absolutely not the one that should miss out, i.e. should be in the team instead of Maddison or Johnson to start that first game, in my opinion. He's had an outstanding pre-season and he deserves to be rewarded for it. Ange very importantly said that there was no intention to play Kulusevski up front anymore. And interestingly, and I don't know why he did it, in the second half, he played Son back through the middle and played Kulusevski on the right. And I don't know if that was layered just to get Kulusevski a little bit of familiarity back with playing on the right ahead of the game against Leicester next week. The only thing that would be in the favour for me of James Maddison continuing to start is he's clearly struggling for form, in my opinion. He's just not doing it. But he does know Solanke really well. And if you look at the Solanke videos, Maddison's there a lot. He's there a lot. He's all around it. Like he's gone to see him while he's having his medical and stuff. So for Solanke, there's that little bit of rapport already built with Maddison. They played together like for England at younger age group levels. And I think maybe once, even for the full team, Solanke has got 1 England cap as well. So there's a relationship between Solanke and Maddison. Maddison is not an option for fantasy at the moment. But Solanke might trigger a return to form is possible. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's unlikely. I don't think it's impossible that Kulusevski and Maddison both play as 8-10 hybrids. Johnson right, Son left, Solanke up front. He just leaves Bissouma. The fixture allows that possibility, but I don't think that he'll do that. I still think it's more likely that Pap Sarr will play. So I think at this minute, the one that will probably miss out is Johnson.
Okay. At 7.5, James, I think
I must
Try
clarify,
Bowen.
I have no confidence in that on Johnson missing out, by the way. And the one thing to remember on Brennan Johnson, which I've said several times earlier, is he is the one that will come off the bench and make the impact and get returns. So if you get to Monday night and you've gone Brennan Johnson and he's not in the team, you do know that he's going to get on the pitch and there's still every chance that he'll get you something off the bench.
Cool.
That said, I've decided to punt Kulusevski as it stands for the one. I don't think if I try and change it, it'll block me, won't it? I
It
don't
will
even
block
know.
you. It will block you now, James. So just
So
sit tight.
I might be stuck on Decky. What I decided with Decky as well was he's obviously had a super pre-season. The same thing. If he didn't start, he'd certainly be getting involved later in the game and possibly against tired legs. I would say Solanke is 90 to 95% start. And because I've been searching for that third forward to basically go with Havertz and Isak under my strategy, Solanke's landed on lap, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going in. I think he'll start. I think Angie's keen to get on with it. I think the opponent enables us to just get on with it. One of the regular questions I've seen over the weekend is on penalties. The answer is, for me, it's 50-50 between Solanke and Son. That decision will probably be made by Son, right? If Son decides that he wants to keep him, he'll keep him. If he decides he's happy to let them go to Solanke, he'll let them go. And I don't know which way that'll go, actually. So
Okay. Okay.
we didn't we
Okay.
despite how much we attacked, we didn't have many pens last year. Porro is worth the
No.
extra. What I would say is, Suj, I didn't the one I would love to have put in as my fourth Tottenham player is Udogie. Oh, just everything would have felt so perfectly to put him in at 5.0. He's played 45 minutes. The difference you've got to remember with him versus other players, say like Solanke joined the club. Solanke's had a pre-season. Udogie, that's his first 45 minutes since April. He's behind everyone on training. I don't know if he starts at Leicester or not, because he can easily play Van der Ven at left back and just play Dragishin. Vicario, I think, also falls into the line of 5 million keepers that you'd consider, but only really if you're going double Tottenham defence, because Porro, for me, is the best pound for pound value defender in the game. So Pedro's a definite for me. On Bergvall, just briefly, because I know you asked about him, Suj, the massive danger is basically just summed up by everything I just mentioned. There's a lot of potential Tottenham assets there, and he's possibly blocking you. And he's not going to start. There's no chance he'll start game week 1, I don't think. Trust me when I say that most Tottenham fans that I listen to would like him to, but I don't.
Where?
But for me, instead of Madison, but
No.
I don't think he's of the required fitness level as yet.
Okay.
I'll talk about that more on Tottenham on Wednesday. I think for me, he's the best 4.5 Bergvall because of the capability of what it would be. In the second half, he assisted Kulusevski's second goal at the weekend, but it is potentially going to block you a third Tottenham. And
All
therefore,
right. That's enough
that
of your shit club.
there,
Let's talk
there,
about West Ham.
therefore, you should look at something else. Well, West Ham Wolves is nothing to talk about, so you can end the podcast now.
Well, the problem with West Ham Wolves is that we've bought so many players that you don't know who is and isn't going to play. Like, we obviously have been the most active club in the transfer window, and I think we probably had the most successful transfer window in terms of strikers. But then what was the front four against Celta Vigo at the weekend? Bowen on the right, Kudus on the left, Paqueta behind Antonio. Does that sound a little bit familiar from last season, right? So what do you actually end up doing? Back four at the weekend again. So we don't even know if Emerson's going to play as a left wing back. I think there's going to be some players there that are going to put their hand up. I think Somerville will become really interesting because I think he will have to play. Like, I didn't realise what a good season he had in the Championship last season. That he was Championship Player of the Season, and I didn't realise that he was that kind of lauded. I thought he just had an okay season there. When we did Correspondent Week, you talked about there's no 6 million midfielders. And I don't know why you would want to force in a player at a specific price point if you can drop down to 5.5. But Paqueta was looking very tasty at the weekend. He's the kind of player that plays with a chip on his shoulder. He always gets himself yellow cards, and we know that that's part of the betting. But it's because he's just an aggressive player. He looked like he was playing like he's got a point to prove, which he clearly has because he's getting a lot of shit in the media. I could see him going on a terror. where he's just picking up goals and assists. I don't know what I would do to buy it. Like, I don't see how I would buy him, but I can see him going on a tear up where he's got a point to prove, where he's picking up goals and assists. And I got asked about whether he would be on penalties. He likes to take them off whoever's got the ball in their hands anyway, James. So
Yeah, I mean that 6 million price feels like a complete graveyard actually, because there's so many options at 6.5 and 5.5. Like I think like a different
find them might drop
circumstance,
down or go up.
like
Like, why would you
comparable
bother?
one, he never gets spoken about. Bruno Guimaraes will tick over absolutely fine, but you're not going to go there, I don't think.
No,
That's not
no.
going to be one of your Newcastle players that you start with. So that feels like a real kind of graveyard shift price. And I think if I had 6 million spare for a midfielder, I'd rather pay for a 5.5 and leave the
Pay
money in the bank.
5.5. I'd buy Smith Rowe. There's a reason Smith Rowe's in there. There's a reason Mintz is in there. And
Yeah.
I'd even consider Hudson Odoi. I just think it's one of those players that will do well and will get overlooked. I think Gomes is a good example of potentially. Defensively, we've moaned about how we're going to be crap, but obviously Tadibo signed.
Yeah.
Tadibo,
And obviously
Kilman,
United wanted him, Manchester United.
yeah. Well, and Juventus wanted him as well. So it was quite a coup that we managed to nick
Yeah,
him.
it is.
Um, Rodriguez sitting in front has obviously been taken away from Barcelona. The only reason he didn't end up at Barcelona is because Xavi left Barcelona as manager. There's going to be something interesting there. I think you can avoid it at the beginning. Jared Bowen, though, obviously scored at the weekend. Just everything you'd expect. Ball over the top, takes it down, puts it in the back of the net. Again, at 7.5, he's just going to be so consistent. If you buy him, he will get you returns. But I'd rather have Jota, if I'm honest with you, at 7.5. So I don't see how I'd be going to Jared Bowen. Interestingly, Kudus has got higher ownership than Jared Bowen.
Yeah, price.
Yeah, I can get that. And minutes, price to minutes ratio. It's going to be an interesting one. I can see myself definitely having one of the attackers from West Ham. If you had an attacking five that played of Kudus, Somerville, Paqueta, Bowen, and Fulkrug, there's going to be goals in there. But that also smacks of 5 players there that could share the returns all among them, rather than any one particularly being a standout.
Did
Tricky.
you watch your game at the weekend?
Most of it, yeah, yeah,
Barron had a lot of efforts, didn't he?
yeah. I mean,
And a lot of them in central areas,
considering he
despite playing from the
didn't,
right.
and remember that was with Antonio playing up top. Fulkrug did an interview where he talked about how he likes to drop into the 10 position and play balls through as well. Yeah, because there's so much change. We've gone with West Ham from there's some really good signings coming into the team to shit. There's so many new signings. How's it all going to fit? And we're in that danger zone of too many new signings now, which is what I feel as a fan. It's like we've done all right. Okay, this is a good improvement to the squad. Is this too much change now? So I think with West Ham, we're gonna go there and we're gonna want to own some assets. You can avoid it in game week 1. Aston Villa is still a difficult fixture. So
Yeah, I'll summarize with a couple of things on West Ham. I think largely it's a watch and wait. I think Areola is very reasonable now as a 4.5 option as a longer term view, because of the improvements you're making throughout the whole team, actually, Suj. So that's fine if people want that as a 4.5. You can also obviously pair that up with Flappy. I guess there's a chance
you're blocking
Flappy
yourself
doesn't
off other
doesn't
players.
play, and I guess there's also a chance that Fodringham becomes number 2, right? So it might not be as good
Well,
as it
look, they
looks on
a keeper
paper.
in the first half and a keeper in the second half yesterday, and it was Areola in the first half and Flappy in the second.
Oh, was it
I
still
don't think
Flappy in the
there's
second?
I don't think there's
Okay.
any risk of Fodringham overtaking Flappy.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks for clarifying that. Bowen is still under consideration for me. I wouldn't start with him generally looking longer term, because I agree with you, definitely Jota under that circumstance. I might squeeze both in. He's a no for me at the moment. There's a couple of things I couldn't shake after watching quite a bit of your game last night, Suj, was the areas that he was getting into were very essential. And I reflected on comments I made to Lee Jackson at the end of the Villa Correspondent Week pod about how they would probably set up, which is similar to how they set up at Dortmund. That's Villa at the weekend just gone. And I do have an inkling that Jared Bowen's going to have some joy this weekend.
Well, I hope so.
Purely because of what I said about Odegaard. And I actually think Bowen will get it on what I saw from your team. Bowen will get into those sort of areas as well, but obviously more advanced and will go behind as per the Paquetá assist for the Bowen goal. I have a really sneaky feeling that Jared Bowen's going to have a good weekend, but I wouldn't, for clarity, just generally speaking, I wouldn't pick him over Jota at the same price.
No, not to start. Cool. You talked about Arsenal and Odegaard having joy. Well, they're playing Wolves. So let's wrap up the show, James, talking about Wolves.
I wish I knew I was going to play left wing for Arsenal this weekend. I really do, because whichever one it is probably going to return. Yeah, we do think Yerson Mosquera is going to play at centre back, which for me is not a now one, but it might be a really interesting one once the turn of fixtures hit, sort of around about game week 9-10, because they have a phenomenal run, Wolves, building into Christmas.
4.0, just for clarity, as a
he is
4.0
option. Yes, but I don't know how many people listening or watching are not going to wildcard before game week 10. I would pick Johnson over Mosquera. There you go. Let's put it that way. Because of the fixtures Ipswich have early on versus Wolves. I don't know. I'd never play Mosquera looking at the fixtures. Never. There might be one where the Ipswich one comes in handy. Things like Everton at home, Leicester at home, stuff like that. Neto gone. That's not helpful. We long felt it was beginning to look like he might stay, but I think he was one we'd long identified would definitely go. We'd sort of said going into the back end of last season. And we did think because the Kilman sell that maybe wouldn't happen. The vibe on Wolves is that they're going to be a little bit more offensive. I think at 5.5, Rodrigo Gomez, yes, their third Gomez, he's really worth watching. You are not going to start with him as your 5.5 option unless you are a Wolves fan. I think he's one who might do really, really well later on, and we should add him to that 5.5 midfielders that we're going to keep a close watch on. Cunha, we don't think available this weekend. I'd be staggered if Arsenal don't win on Saturday. Although I do think that most weeks, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, Wolves for me is definitely a watch and wait. With like Arsenal, Chelsea, Newcastle, Villa, Liverpool as 5 of the first 6. You can avoid it and come back to it after game week 7 or game week 9, whichever you prefer. But 8 Nori still sitting there at 4.5 would be under consideration, but not until their fixtures get better for me.
Yeah, I'd avoid Saad. I've been linked with a couple of keepers as well, so I'd avoid that one. Yeah, if you wanted Wolves' defensive investment at 4.5, then yeah, clearly you'd want to go 8 Nori. But yeah, I don't think you do at the moment.
You wouldn't. You definitely wouldn't. No. Good. So we're now down to 5 days, James. Don't forget, it's a Friday deadline. I'm probably saying that to myself. Regular listeners will know. Don't forget, it's a Friday deadline. What time's kickoff? UK time, 7:30, 8 o'clock?
8, so it's 6:30 p.m. UK time deadline.
If
and for those who only listen to our Monday podcasts, don't leave it till the last minute if you can, because that website will be hot.
Yeah, I get that. The only good thing is that it's not like Man City leaks or maybe one of the teams that might have higher ownership.
Right before deadline last year, we had the Gabriel rumour dropped
that was
on
the day
Andy's
after
stream,
as
wasn't
well, to be fair. Yeah.
So and Arsenal 3 o'clock Saturday, Liverpool at 12:30 Saturday, and we'll travel on the Friday. Don't rule out late news. I mean, for me, even if I knew Garnacho was going to start definitively, that would maybe even be a late change for me. Possibly. If I knew Garnacho was...
You'd have to give up your 4 Spurs, James.
Yeah. Kulusevski would go at the same price, I think. Yeah, I'd have to. But then I think that's probably the right call if I know Garnacho is going to start.
Good. Okay, that's a quick, I say quick, it's an hour and a half's worth of rundown on everything, but hopefully it's been useful. If there are any players that you disagree with or you think should be added to the watch list or the short list, whichever you want to call it, why not jump on the comments on YouTube and let us know, and maybe we'll talk about them, because in the coming days, James, we're talking about chip strategy tomorrow.
Yeah.
Quick and simple, because it's not as complicated or as in-depth as it is right now. You and Clayton going through captaincies and rotations.
We'll still rip the arse out of chip strategy tomorrow, by the way. Yeah. Wednesday, we're going to go through captaincy. We're going to talk more about, Haaland, Salah, and those players priced in the 10 million bracket. And we'll also look at rotations. If you're looking at Lewis Hall, and then okay, so when don't I want to play them, and looking at rotations for several sides in terms of who matches up quite well. If you want to go with, say, like particularly two 4.5s, but I also think because of people like Bob, you can look at these combinations in different ways, right? So we'll look at that Wednesday. Thursday, me, you, and Clates on a Q&A. And then early as we
Yep.
can, Friday, me, you, and Clates going through intended final drafts that will probably get ripped up for you and Clates during the stream. Mine will only get ripped up based on team news, I think.
We shall see. We shall see. If you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Planet FPL, where you can join. It's going to be a great season ahead to be a patron. Lots of additional content. You get an extra podcast each and every day. If you're advanced here, you get an extra bit of video content from James each and every single day. We have prize leagues. We have a fixture planning spreadsheet that you can download and use for free. We have a Slack community with coming up to 1,000 engaged managers in there, fans of all of the clubs that are happy to help and ask you questions, whether you've got selection dilemmas or just generally chat and banter. On top of that, prize leagues, did I mention, James? What
You
else? What am I
did,
missing?
yeah. No
Good.
ads. That's just from
Yeah,
basics
you can
here,
listen
isn't
to
it?
all of the podcast audio ad-free on
And video.
Patreon as well.
And video.
Is cheap as chips. So head over to patreon.com/Planet FPL. If not, then just enjoy the free content because we love having you as part of that as well. Subscribe wherever you're listening to the audio, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, do whatever all the other YouTubers and podcasters ask you to do as well. Leave us a review. Stay safe, look after yourselves, tinker away. Ciao for now.
Thanks, everyone. Be nice to each other. Remember, play it your way. Cue music, please, man child.